Have you ever walked out of the hardest thing you've ever done in your life? And I mean the kind of hard that cost you everything, your pride, your secrets, your dignity, only to stand in a parking lot with a duffel bag at your feet and realize that nobody is coming? That was me. 63 years old, standing outside Pinecrest Recovery Center in Flagstaff, Arizona, on a Tuesday morning in February. The air was sharp enough to cut through a jacket. My breath came out in little clouds. I had my duffel bag, a paper discharge folder with aftercare instructions printed on it, and $61 in my wallet. I had my phone too, but I'd already checked it 4 times, and there were no new messages. Just the one from 2 days ago. The one from my son-in-law. Dad, Tess is tied up at work. I'll make sure someone comes. Don't worry about a thing. Don't worry about a thing. I stood there for 45 minutes. I know because I kept checking the time, telling myself 5 more minutes, then 5 more, then 1 more. It was 9:17 when I walked out those doors. By 10:02, I finally stopped pretending. Have you ever had a moment where you understood something completely? Not thought it, not suspected it, but knew it, the way you know your own name, and you just weren't ready to feel the full weight of it yet? That was where I was standing, in the cold. With $61. Knowing my daughter wasn't coming. You need to know something about me before I go any further, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Gerald. I'm 63. I spent 31 years as a shift supervisor at a paper mill in northern Arizona. I'm the kind of man who showed up. That was the one thing I was always proud of. You call me, I'm there. You need something moved, I'll bring the truck. You're in the hospital at 2 in the morning. I'm already in the parking lot. That was who I was. That was the thing I built my whole identity around. My wife, Barbara, died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 58 years old and she had laugh lines around her eyes, and she made the best pot roast in Coconino County, and then she was just gone. I didn't handle it well. I want to be honest about that, because the people who tell their stories and leave out the part where they made the wrong choices, I don't trust those stories. So here it is. I started drinking. Not right away. At first I held it together. I went back to work. I mowed the lawn. I showed up to things. But by the 2nd year, I was pouring whiskey into my coffee mug before noon, and by the 3rd year, I was calling in sick twice a week and sitting in my recliner, watching the light change on the walls, and not being able to tell you what day it was. My daughter Tess saw it. She came over one Sunday and found me on the couch with an empty bottle on the floor next to me, and the television on some channel I hadn't intentionally chosen. She sat down across from me and she cried. Not at me, just cried. She was 34 years old, and she looked like her mother when she cried, and I couldn't stand to look at her. That was the beginning of the conversation that ended with me agreeing to go to Pinecrest. My son-in-law, Dexter, made the calls. He found the facility, he handled the paperwork, he drove me there himself on a Sunday morning. He shook my hand in the parking lot and told me he was proud of me for doing this. He seemed sincere, he looked me in the eye. I believed him. I spent 6 weeks at Pinecrest. 6 weeks of group sessions and one-on-one counseling and 5 a.m. wake-ups and bad cafeteria eggs and learning, slowly, painfully, what grief actually felt like when you stopped drowning it. I made a friend there named Hector, a retired postal worker from Tucson, who'd lost his wife the same year I lost Barbara. We used to sit on the bench outside after dinner and not say much, and it was the most comfortable I'd felt in years. I called Tess every Thursday. Dexter usually answered. He'd say she was busy, she was at work, she was picking up the kids, she'd call me back. She called back maybe 4 times in 6 weeks. Each time she sounded distracted. Each time I'd tell her I was doing well. I was working through things, I was feeling clearer. She'd say, "That's great." Dad and I'd listen for something underneath those words that I could hold on to. When I got my discharge date, February 11th, I called the house. Dexter answered. I told him the date and the time, 9 a.m., and he said, "We'll be there. Don't worry about a thing." I wrote the date on the little calendar they gave us. I circled it. So there I was, February 11th, 10:02 in the morning, $61. I walked back inside and asked the front desk if I could use the phone to call a cab. The woman behind the desk, a kind woman named Rosa, who I'd seen every day for 6 weeks, looked at me and then looked out the glass doors at the empty parking lot, and I could see her understand the situation without me having to explain it. She handed me the phone. The cab was going to be 25 minutes and cost me about $45 to get to the nearest bus station. That would leave me $16. The bus back to my apartment in Williams would take 2.5 hours and cost 11. I did that math standing there with the phone in my hand, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not sadness, not anger. Just a very quiet, very heavy sense of being completely alone in the world. I sat down on one of the benches outside to wait. I put my duffel bag between my feet. I stared at the mountains. I heard footsteps on the pavement to my left. "Excuse me, sir?" I looked up. There was a man standing a few feet away, mid-40s maybe, dark coat, work boots, the kind of face that looked like it had seen some weather. He was holding a paper bag from the diner across the street, and he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not curiosity. Something else. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "Are you by any chance Gerald Mack?" I just stared at him for a second. "I am," I said. He let out a long breath. He put the paper bag down on the bench beside me, and he sat down on the far end, not too close, like he understood that I might not want someone in my space right now. "I thought so," he said. "I've been sitting in my truck across the lot for about 20 minutes trying to decide whether to come over." He paused. "My name is Edwin Colley. You probably don't remember me." He was right, I didn't. I looked at him carefully, the jaw, the eyes, something around the brow, and got nothing. "That's all right," he said. "You knew me when I was 17. I looked pretty different." The summer Barbara and I were married, 28 years old and broke and happy, in a way I don't think I fully appreciated at the time. We rented the downstairs unit of a duplex on Birch Street in Williams. The upstairs neighbor was a woman named Phyllis, a widow in her 60s who kept a bird feeder on her balcony and brought us casseroles when we moved in. Phyllis had a nephew who used to visit in the summers, a kid whose home life, from what I gathered, was not good. He was quiet and thin and wore the same 4 shirts on rotation and spent a lot of time sitting on the front steps reading paperback westerns. I used to bring him out back when I was working on the truck, handed him tools, taught him how to change the oil, how to read a dipstick, how to tell by sound when something wasn't right. Some weekends he'd help me with yard work and I'd give him $20, which he always took with a kind of careful gratitude that stuck with me. Not the gratitude of a kid who expected things. The gratitude of a kid who didn't. One summer, he must have been 17. He showed up at our door on a Thursday night with a backpack and a bruise on his jaw and didn't say anything, just stood there. Barbara looked at him for 1 second and said, "Come in," and that was that. He slept on our couch for 11 days. When he left, he had a bus ticket to Phoenix where a school placement program had found him a spot in a work-study program. I drove him to the station. I gave him $60 from the emergency envelope Barbara kept in the kitchen drawer, and a phone number for a social services contact she'd tracked down, and I shook his hand and told him he was going to be fine. He looked at me on that platform the way I'd never had anyone look at me before or since, like I was something solid he was anchoring himself to before he stepped out onto open water. Then the bus came and he got on it, and I drove home, and that was the last time I saw him. That was 26 years ago, Edwin Colley. I stared at him on that bench, and the pieces came together slowly. The jaw, yes, the eyes, something in the way he held his shoulders, and then all at once it clicked. "Eddie," I said. He nodded. I didn't say anything for a while. I looked at this 43-year-old man in a good coat with strong hands, and I tried to locate the 17-year-old with the paperback westerns somewhere in his face. He was there. Just older. Just settled. "How did you know I was here?" I finally said. "Phyllis," he said. "She's 91, still sharp as a tack. She keeps in touch with people. She heard from someone, I don't know the chain, that you'd gone through a hard stretch. She called me last month and mentioned you might be at Pinecrest finishing up a program." He paused. "I live in Flagstaff now. Have for about 12 years. And you just came?" I had to decide whether it was strange, he said. "I figured if you had family coming, you'd never even know I'd been here. And if you didn't," he stopped. "The paper bag has a breakfast sandwich and a coffee. I didn't know how you took it, so there's cream and sugar on the side." I looked at the bag. I looked at this man. Something moved in my chest that I wasn't prepared for. I'd spent 6 weeks learning to feel things instead of drinking them down, but I wasn't ready for this. I put my hand over my mouth for a second and breathed through my nose and got myself back. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Don't thank me," he said. "You drove me to a bus station with $60 and a phone number when I had nowhere to go. I've thought about that day my whole adult life." He looked out at the mountains. "I'm a licensed electrician. I've got a crew of 4. My wife and I have been married for 15 years. We have 2 kids. We own our house. He said it plainly. Not bragging, just accounting, just laying it out. All of that started with that bus ticket, so I picked up the coffee. I took a sip. It was good coffee. Where's your family? He asked after a while. Not accusatory, gentle. My son-in-law said someone would come, I said. I kept my voice even. Nobody came. Edwin looked at the empty parking lot. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Then let me drive you home. It's a 45-minute drive from Flagstaff to Williams on the I-40. Edwin drove a gray pickup that was clean and smelled faintly of sawdust. He put on low music, something country and old. He didn't push me to talk. I watched the high desert roll by and ate the breakfast sandwich and felt for the first time in a very long time like I was allowed to just sit still. About 20 minutes in, I said, I don't understand why she didn't come. Edwin was quiet for a second. Then he said, I don't know your daughter, but I've seen people get cut off from their own instincts by someone who knows how to apply the right kind of pressure. It doesn't mean she stopped caring. It might mean she's not as free as she looks. I sat with that. When he pulled up to my apartment building, a 2-story on the south side of town, nothing much, brown siding and a parking lot, I started to get out, and he said, Gerald, one more thing. I looked at him. What does your son-in-law do? He manages a property portfolio, I said. Has about a dozen rental units around the county. Does well with it. Does the property he manages include anything that belonged to you or your wife? The question landed somewhere cold. It did. After Barbara died, there was the matter of the house. The house we'd paid off together. The one on Creekside Drive with the big elm in the backyard where Tess grew up. I'd been in no condition to manage it. Dexter had offered to handle the rental of it while I was going through the worst of things. It made sense at the time. He had the contacts, the experience. I signed over the management authority. I hadn't looked at a statement in over a year. I told Edwin this. He nodded slowly. I'm not saying anything definite, he said. I'm just saying that if I were in your shoes, I'd want to take a very close look at those accounts. I'd like to tell you I went inside and immediately pulled out every document and figured it all out that same afternoon. I didn't. I went inside and I sat down in my recliner, and I stared at the wall, and I thought about Barbara, and I thought about Tess, and I thought about the parking lot, and I was very tired. But I didn't drink. That was the thing. That was the thing I held on to. 6 weeks of work, and I wasn't going to throw it away. Not for Dexter. Not for any of it. The next morning I called the bank. I asked for a transaction history on the rental management account that Dexter had been operating under my authorization. It took 3 days and 2 follow-up calls and eventually a visit in person with my ID and a copy of the original management agreement. What I found was not subtle. In 22 months, Dexter had collected the $127,400 in rental income from the Creekside Drive property. I knew this because I could cross-reference the rental rate he'd agreed to with the occupancy records. Of that, $98,300 had been deposited into an account I didn't recognize. I found it later. A separate LLC he'd formed under a variation of a business name close enough to his main one that you'd miss it if you weren't looking. The remaining deposits into my account, the ones I'd actually received, totaled less than $29,000 over 22 months. He'd told me the rental market was soft. The rental market was not soft. I sat at my kitchen table with those pages spread in front of me, and I thought about that parking lot. I thought about don't worry about a thing. I thought about 6 weeks of Barbara being gone, and me drinking myself into a chair, and Dexter stepping in, being so helpful, handling everything. I thought about how useful a man in a recliner is, how easy. I was angry. I want to be honest about that too. I was angrier than I'd been in years. But I was also clear-headed in a way I hadn't been in a long time. And that combination, anger plus clarity, is something. I called Edwin. Here's the thing about Edwin Colley that I hadn't known when I was handing him tool after tool in my back driveway 26 years ago. The kid had a mind. Not just competent, genuinely sharp. He'd gone through his work-study program, gotten his electrician's license, built his business from one truck to a full crew, and along the way had developed what he described as an uncomfortable interest in contracts and property law out of professional necessity. He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew enough to know what I was looking at. He came over that Saturday morning. He sat at my kitchen table and went through every page. He was methodical. He organized things in a way I wouldn't have thought to, by date, then by amount, then by corresponding deposit destination. He used a yellow legal pad. He filled 4 pages. This isn't a gray area, he said finally. He said it quietly. This is straight theft, conversion of funds. He had a fiduciary duty to you as your agent, and he's been skimming the top for nearly 2 years. Can I prove it? You've got the bank records, the original management agreement, the rental contract with the tenant. That's a solid foundation. He paused. You need a lawyer, a real one. Not for a consultation, you need someone who's going to take this and run with it. He had a name. Of course he did. A woman named Catherine Slade who did property and estate litigation out of Flagstaff. He'd met her through a contract dispute with a general contractor 2 years ago. He called her while he was sitting at my table and spoke to her assistant and got me an appointment for the following Thursday. Edwin, I said, I can't. Don't, he said. Don't do that. I stopped. I've built a good life, he said. A lot of that is the bus ticket and the $60. And I know that sounds like I'm making it bigger than it was, but it wasn't small to me. It wasn't small at all. He looked at me. Let me do this. I didn't argue. Catherine Slade was 50 direct and had a way of listening to you that made you feel like every word was being filed in exactly the right place. I sat across from her on that Thursday and spread my documents on her conference table and told her everything. She didn't react much while I talked. She asked 3 precise questions. Then she picked up her pen and said, "He underestimated you." I didn't know what to say to that. Men who take advantage of grieving people generally count on 2 things, she said. 1, that the grief will last long enough for them to finish what they're doing. 2, that the person will be too ashamed or too depleted to come back swinging. She looked at the documents. He had almost 2 years, but here you are. She filed the civil claim within 2 weeks. Dexter was served at his office. The amount she claimed, including penalties and interest under Arizona law, came to just over $112,000. I know what you're thinking, because I thought it too. What does Tess do when her husband gets served with a lawsuit from her father? I found out on a Wednesday evening when my phone rang. Her voice, when I answered, was different from the distracted voice I'd been getting on Thursdays for 6 weeks. It was raw, like something had been stripped off of it. Dad, she said. Just that. Just Dad. I said, "Hi, sweetheart." She was quiet for a long moment, then I didn't know. Her voice broke on the last word. I want you to know that I found out. I went through the accounts because Catherine's office sent a notice and I looked and She stopped. She pulled herself together. I didn't know how much. I didn't know he was. I knew things weren't right between you two. I knew he'd been keeping me away from calling you. But I thought it was just. I thought he was just. I don't know what I thought. I know, I said. I should have been there on the 11th, she said. He told me you'd pushed back the date, that you wanted more time. I believed him. There it was. The piece I hadn't had. He'd told her I wasn't coming out yet. And she'd believed him because why wouldn't she? He'd managed every communication, every update, every Thursday call. He'd been the filter between us for months. That's how it works. It's never one big thing. It's 100 small redirects. Are you okay? I asked her. No, she said. Are you? I'm getting there, I said. And I meant it. She came down that weekend. She sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Edwin had spread the bank records, and we drank coffee and talked for 4 hours. Real talking. The kind we hadn't done in years, maybe since her mother was alive. She told me things about the last 2 years that made me understand her better, and hurt for her more than I hurt for myself. She was dealing with her own reckoning with who Dexter was. That was its own road. I didn't rush any of it. I just listened. Catherine's case moved forward. Dexter, through his attorney, tried to claim that the management arrangement had been informal and the accounting had been unclear. Catherine submitted the signed management agreement, the bank statements, the LLC formation documents, and a forensic accounting analysis that had been done by a CPA she worked with regularly. Dexter's attorney countered. Catherine was unimpressed. The mediation took place on a Friday morning in April. I sat on one side of a long table. Dexter sat on the other side and did not look at me. He looked thinner. He looked like a man who had spent several months realizing that the thing he'd bet on, that I was too broken to come back, had not held. The settlement was $94,500. Not everything Catherine had claimed, but Catherine had told me that mediation rarely gets you everything, and this was a very good outcome. I signed the agreement at 11:45 in the morning. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired and a little sad and very clear. $94,000 doesn't give you back 2 years. It doesn't give you back the version of your daughter who might have called more if he hadn't been managing the calls. It doesn't undo anything. It just means the accounting is closer to right. And sometimes that's what you have to settle for. But here's the thing. On the way out of the mediator's building, I stopped in the lobby and I called Edwin. I told him the number. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I'll be damned. I want to take you and your wife to dinner," I said. "Somewhere good. You pick, Gerald." "I know," I said. "I know you're going to say the $60 and the bus ticket. But this is different. This is me choosing to. Let me choose to." He laughed. It was a short laugh, honest, a little surprised. "All right," he said. "All right. I know a place in Flagstaff my wife loves. Italian. They make their own pasta." "Done," I said. Tess filed for divorce in May. I didn't push her toward it, and I didn't push her away from it. It was her decision, and she made it with clear eyes, and I was proud of her for that. Proud in the way you're proud of someone when they do a hard thing without flinching. She moved into a rental on the east side of Williams with my 2 grandkids, a boy and a girl, 9 and 7, and she started over. I'm 63 years old. I go to meetings 3 times a week at a church hall on Main Street. I've been sober for 8 months. I have a lawyer's number in my phone, and I know how to read a bank statement, and I have a standing dinner reservation at an Italian place in Flagstaff once a month, with a man who showed up in a parking lot when nobody else did. I still live in the same apartment. Some mornings I drive out to Creekside Drive and sit in front of the old house. Someone else lives there now, a young family with a basketball hoop in the driveway. And I think about Barbara. I think about the elm tree in the back. I think about the kind of person she was, the kind of person she made me want to be. I am working on being that person again. Here's what I know now that I couldn't see from the bottom of a recliner. The people who are counting on you to stay down, they're not counting on you because they're strong. They're counting on you because they need you to believe you're weak. The moment you stop believing it, the whole equation changes. I stood in a parking lot in February with $61 and a discharge folder and nothing coming. And then something came, not from the direction I expected, not from the person I'd hoped for, but it came. Edwin brought a breakfast sandwich and a question and 26 years of quiet gratitude, and that turned out to be exactly enough. I answered on the second ring. I always answer on the second ring. Some habits you keep,